Hi everyone, my name is Gabriel and this is the Hour of the Raven, your channel for everything Ravenloft, RPG, Dungeons and Dragons and horror.
Today we are going to explore the history of Dominia, an asylum for the mentally disturbed, directed by a brilliant and controversial doctor, whose origins go back to the extinct realm of Gundarak. But first, a brief clarification. Before we started to explore the Sea of Sorrows, our exploration through the mists took place in the core of Ravenloft, and passed through domains that had already been inserted and described in novels, adventures, and mainly in the Ravenloft Gazetteers, books that brought detailed information about the domains and their Dark Lords. Until that moment, I had taken care to feature the Ravenloft setting in my videos, taking into account only official sources. However, in the case of Dominia, and other domains not previously covered by the Ravenloft Gazetteers, I intend to expand on these sources of information. Dominia first appeared in the Red Box of the Ravenloft campaign setting in 1994, and featured a Dark Lord who had appeared as a major character in the Feast of Goblins adventure. After these first appearances, the domain received only mentions in the Domains of Dread campaign setting, but was described in detail in the Bleak House campaign. The domain should have been covered in one of the 3rd edition Gazetteers, focused on the Sea of Sorrows, but unfortunately, White Wolf's license to release books for the setting came to an end, and these books haven't been written. However, the Ravenloft fan community wouldn't let the setting rot in oblivion. The Fraternity of Shadows website, the most well-known and organized site for fans of the setting, has published netbooks that continue the Gazetteer's proposal, exploring in depth and detail the domains of dread. Some of these books explore the Nocturnal Sea, the domain of Sorang, or the cluster of Zerisha, for example, and for some time now they have developed a gazetteer for the Sea of Sorrows. Although the gazetteer for the Sea of Sorrows is not yet finalized and published as a single book, some of its passages describing some domains have already been published as previews in the Court of the Raven netbooks. I will leave the link where you can download the book. The next video about Dominia will be based on the official setting material and the article about Dominia written by Lation Deep Shadow Campbell. The article on Dominia was published as a preview of the Sea of Sorrows Gazetteer, and it's possible that the final text will change when the Gazetteer is finally published. Are you ready? On our journey through the Sea of Sorrows, in search of the whereabouts of Dr. Rudolf von Richten, we had an unfortunate stopover at Blaustein, when we were captured and tortured by the infamous Bluebeard. Delivered as prisoners to a ship, we are taken to the island of Dominia, where we are interned as patients. Forced to wear cloaks and with masks fastened to our faces, we are subjected to dehumanizing and torturous treatment, and no one seems to hear our pleas. Under the effect of drugs or spells, and weakened by our torments, we enter a state of isolation, paranoia, and delirium, and at some point we mention the name of Dr. von Richten. This seems to alarm some of the masqueraders around us, and at night, instead of an induced sleep, we are taken to a great hall, where a feast awaits us. On the table before us is the leader of the sanatorium, Dr. Dacloud Heimfroth, who invites us to dinner. He apologizes to us for the treatment received so far, and warns that we have been sent to the sanatorium as dangerous and delusional patients. Once this error has been corrected, he asks us why we really wanted to come to the island of Dominia, and how he could help us. Sensing our hesitation, he promptly offers to ease our concerns and reveal his background as an alienist and psychiatrist, as well as the history of his renowned facility.
Hour of the Raven.
The remote island of Dominia is not a nation or a kingdom, and until recently it was uncharted and possibly uninhabited territory. There is not much to study about its history, and there is not even evidence that such a place has been previously inhabited before the arrival of Dr. Dacloud Heimfroth. However, the Asylum for the Mentally Disturbed, under the tutelage of Dr. Dacloud Heimfroth, also known as Dr. Dominiani, preceded its construction on this remote island. Originally, the fortress where the Asylum was first installed was the ancestral home of the Heimfroth family, a traditional aristocratic family of Gundarak. The family was plagued by a congenital illness or a curse, which tended to progressively destroy their sanity throughout their adult lives. At some point, these aristocrats must have aroused the wrath of the ruler of Gundarak, the tyrannical Duke Gundar, who seized the Heimfroth keep and turned it into a military outpost and prison. The first asylum for the mentally disturbed began in 599 of the Barovian calendar, when a family heir returned from distant lands to reclaim his family's property. This heir, whose historical records refer to the name of Dr. Dominiani, managed to win the favor of Duke Gundar, to serve him as an ally and a doctor for his armies, and to use his family's fortress and its prisoners as guinea pigs for his experimental treatments and research on mental diseases. Records from this time indicate that this ancestor of Dr. Dacloud Heimfroth, from whom he inherited the same name and alias, became an important ally of Duke Gundar and gradually turned Heimfroth's keep into an asylum for the mentally ill. The Heimfroth family gained influence and power in the lands of Gundarak over the years, and maintained their expertise and fame as alienists in running the asylum. However, events from a few decades ago would involve Duke Gundar and Dr. Dacloud Heimfroth in political intrigues that would eventually lead him to abandon the lands of Gundarak. In the year 736 of the Barovian calendar, Dr. Dacloud Heimfroth was involved in an episode called the Gundarakite Conspiracy. Plotting with Duke Gundar and Akriel, the daughter of the famous bard Harkon Lucas, they became involved in the search of a powerful artifact called the Crown of Diagon, with plans to expand their area of power. The conspiracy was thwarted by a group of adventurers who invaded Heimfroth's keep in search of the artifact. These adventurers pursued the conspirators and eventually confronted Duke Gundar, putting an end to the vampire's existence. Dr. Dacloud Heimfroth survived this encounter, and many accuse him of playing an active role in the destruction of his former master. For a brief moment, he took over Gundarak's throne as its new ruler, but his political aspirations did not last long. Without Duke Gundar's tyrannical presence, the land seethed with intrigue and strife. Dr. Dacloud was not an apt ruler, being more interested in his own research into the dark recesses of the mind. Political instability fostered the greed of neighboring kingdoms, and Gundarak would be invaded by forces from Barovia and Invidia, who would conquer its territory. Dr. Dacloud Heimfroth, however, would not be present at the time of the conquest. During the events of the Grand Conjunction, in 740 of the Barovian calendar, a strange fog descended on Gundarak, and the Heimfroth's keep was shrouded in thick mist. When this fog finally lifted, no trace of Dr. the Cloud, his servants, or the patients of his clinic could be found, and the fortress was completely empty. For some time, the whereabouts of Gundarak's former ruler and his patients remained a mystery, but soon a group of Vistanis brought news of the founding of a new asylum for the mentally disturbed in distant lands. According to reports, after being swallowed by the mists, Dr. Dominiani and his most faithful assistants found themselves on an island surrounded by mists, which had at its center an imposing building which was very similar to the sanatorium that Dr. the Cloud previously managed. Taking control of this establishment, he soon discovered that many of his patients had also been drawn into the island and were roaming the woods. Taking these facts as a sign of fate, he soon resumed his vocation for medicine, bringing his patients back to the safety of the building to adopt an innovative method of treatment. It was at this time that Dr. Dominiani unveiled his innovative treatment to keep patients and staff at the sanatorium in similar attire, with their faces covered in masks. The island remained isolated by the mists and inaccessible. Sometimes some poor madmen were swallowed by the mists and taken to the forests that surround the sanatorium, but the arrival of visitors by this mysterious path was rare and inconstant. This situation would change when a Vistani tribe visited the island of Dominia. The Valstic caravan from the Korvara tribe discovered a business opportunity in the isolation of the island. After a long negotiation with Dr. the Cloud, a deal was struck with Raoni Madame Tzura, who would help them buy supplies and collect patients for the sanatorium. The travelers of the mists then began to advertise the services of the sanatorium of Dr. Dominiani where they passed, charging for the treatment and passage to the distant lands of Dominia. Although many patients arrived on the island in this way, the distrust that the Vistani have sometimes hindered their promotion of the institution. Still, the fame of Dr. Heimfroth began to spread, especially when after a few months, the Vistani of the Valtis caravan brought back some patients, cured of their mental afflictions. Dominia's isolation by the mists would not last. A few years after the establishment of his sanatorium, the mists that surrounded the island were dissipated, and it became part of the western limit of the Sea of Sorrows. Shortly after this integration, the island made its first contact with sailors, when a ship sank in its vicinity. The sailors and their captain were rescued by Dr. the Cloud, and Captain Baiku and his surviving crew would come to employ themselves in the service of the sanatorium. Utilizing his resources, Dr. Dominiani acquired a caravel named Mercy and installed Baiku as its captain. The ship began to make constant trips to the mainland, where they began to establish contact as emissaries and after held partnerships for the treatment of patients. The sanatorium gained great fame and renown after receiving a visit from the lawyer Gerard Lefic, who came from Borca at the request of one of his clients to bring evidence about his case, and wrote a book about the lives of the patients in Dominia, called The Refuge. The book brought great fame to Dr. Heimfroth and was even adapted into a play of the same name doing much to spread the name of Dr. Dominiani as one of the leading specialists in the field. Sanitary agreements with the Fellowship Charity Clinic from Martyra Bay in Darkon and the Granheim Sanatorium in Lamordia ensure a constant influx of patients, and it's not uncommon for some well-to-do families to send for treatment on the asylum some of their members who are tormented or who may have become unwanted or embarrassing. The sanatorium's history is not without violent incidents. In the year 750 of the Barovian calendar, a group of visitors interceded to rescue a patient from the clinic and battled their way out of the facility, managing to steal a vessel to escape. While the patient's identity is not known with certainty, rumors speculate that this patient was the renowned author and monster hunter Dr. Rudolf van Richten. Details about this escapade cannot be confirmed, however, as if indeed Dr. Rudolf van Richten was here, he disappeared again soon after escaping, and his whereabouts are still unknown. Our dinner and conversation with Dr. MacLeod are pleasant and comforting. We began to feel relieved, believing that we finally will be released from this island. We mentioned our search for Dr. Van Richten. Dominiani listened carefully, getting all the details of our search. However, he seemed suddenly irritated by our questions. "I don't recall a patient with that name. Why do you think he would be here? Perhaps you are confused or are imagining things. This is very common in cases of delirium like the ones you are experiencing." We protest these claims, saying we are perfectly sane, but he just stared at us deeply. Suddenly, our minds are taken by a state of extreme mental confusion, and we are taken by inexplicable impulses. Some of us start to fight among ourselves, or wander aimlessly, or just stare off into nothing. It is not what it seems to me. Take our patients to their cells. They are very agitated and will need stricter treatment to overcome and forget their traumas. We are subdued and dragged back to the cells, where an unhealthy lethargy and sleep invade us. In our deep sleep, we enter a dream, where we are free and walking through the abandoned corridors of the sanatorium. Soon, an enigmatic figure, without robes or mask, beckons us and guides us to a secret passage in the basement of the asylum. There, a group of people is gathered. "Welcome to Ward Zero," tells us one of the figures in the secret room. In dreams, we are protected from the doctors of the hospital, and we gather to devise a way to share information and escape these horrors. Come on, we have a lot of horrors to uncover and strategies to discuss. Join us, subscribe to this channel and activate notifications, and let's unravel the secrets of Dominia.